tired rancher was taken in by two single mothers, but what they did to him is shocking. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. A tired rancher had been living alone for years, struggling day in and day out. His life had become a routine of hard work under the sun, dealing with cattle, and maintaining his small, worn-down ranch. But despite the physical exhaustion, it wasn't the labor that weighed the heaviest on his heart. It was the solitude. After the loss of his wife many years ago, he had isolated himself from the world, unwilling to open up to anyone again. The days dragged on, one indistinguishable from the next. His only company was the quiet, endless fields of his ranch. But life has a way of changing when you least expect it. One cold morning, as the rancher was gathering firewood, he noticed something unusual. A knock on the door. At first, he thought it might be a passing traveler asking for directions. But when he opened the door, he found two women standing there, both with small children in tow. They were weary, their clothes torn, and their faces lined with the stress of a hard life. They were mothers, struggling to make ends meet. The older of the two women explained that they had nowhere else to turn. Their husbands had passed away, leaving them to care for their children alone. With no family nearby, they had heard of the rancher's reputation for being kind-hearted, and though he lived alone, he was known to help those in need. At first, the rancher hesitated. He had his own problems to deal with. His ranch was barely staying afloat, and he had no room for guests. But there was something about their situation, something about the vulnerability in their eyes that reminded him of his late wife. Perhaps it was guilt, or perhaps just a flicker of compassion he had buried deep inside. But he agreed to let them stay. Little did he know, this decision would change everything. The women settled in, and the rancher found himself working alongside them, helping with daily chores. He was surprised by how much lighter the burden felt with their presence. For the first time in years, there was laughter in the house. The children brought joy to the old, quiet ranch. But what happened next, something he never expected, would shake his entire world. These two women, whom he had allowed into his home out of pity and kindness, were hiding a secret. It wasn't just their vulnerability that had drawn him in, it was their strength. And as the days passed, the rancher began to notice things that didn't quite add up. Strange things that made him wonder what exactly he had gotten himself into. What was their story? And what was it they were really after? The mystery behind their presence would soon unfold in ways that would leave the rancher questioning everything he thought he knew about family, kindness, and loyalty. Stay tuned for the next part of the story, where the shocking truth will come to light, and nothing will ever be the same again. The rancher's life began to shift in ways he hadn't anticipated. At first, the presence of the two women and their children seemed like an intrusion, but over time, they became a source of comfort and even joy. The rancher, who had once spent his days in solitude, now found himself enjoying the simple conversations at dinner, the children's laughter echoing through the house, and the steady rhythm of their shared work. For the first time in years, he didn't feel quite so alone. Every morning, the women would wake up early to help with chores. The older woman, Sarah, was a natural at organizing and managing tasks, while the younger one, Emily, was gentle and caring, often tending to the children while also helping with the cooking and cleaning. Despite the hard work, they all seemed to get along, and slowly, the rancher began to feel like he had found a family again. However, as the days passed, he noticed something strange. The two women were never too eager to talk about their pasts. They seemed to avoid certain questions, especially when it came to their lives before they came to the ranch. The rancher, curious about their backgrounds, started to wonder if there was more to their story than they had let on. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, the rancher decided to confront them. He found Sarah sitting alone on the porch, gazing at the stars. "Sarah," he began, his voice quiet but firm, "I need to know more about you. About your past." She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, there was silence between them, the night air heavy with unspoken words. Then, with a deep sigh, Sarah spoke. "We didn't want to burden you with our past," she said softly. but we've been running for years. We came here to escape, to start fresh." The rancher sat beside her, waiting for her to continue. "My husband," she trailed off, her voice cracking. "He was a good man, but he got mixed up with the wrong people. We were in debt, and they came for us. They hurt us, and we had no choice but to run. Emily and the kids, they've been through a lot." The rancher's heart softened as he listened. He had always known there was something more to their story, but hearing it from Sarah herself made him realize just how much pain they had endured. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, offering comfort. "You don't have to run anymore," he said. "You're safe here." Sarah looked at him with gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means to us." In the days that followed, the rancher's bond with the two women grew even stronger. He could see the exhaustion in their eyes, the weight of their past still haunting them, but he also saw the strength they had gained from surviving it. They had come to him for help, but in a way, they had also saved him. The rancher began to open up more about his own past, sharing memories of his wife and how he had built the ranch from the ground up. He realized that in allowing these women into his life, he had found a new purpose, a sense of belonging he had lost long ago. But as the rancher became more comfortable with the women, he started to notice something that unsettled him. Emily, the younger woman, had been acting strangely. She was often lost in thought, and when she spoke, her words seemed rehearsed, as if she was hiding something. The rancher decided to ask her about it one afternoon as they worked together in the garden. "Emily," he began, "I've noticed you seem distant sometimes. Is everything all right?" She looked at him, startled by the question. Then, after a long pause, she spoke in a low voice. "I'm just scared," she admitted. "Scared of what might happen if we stay here too long. They might find us." The rancher furrowed his brow. "Who might find you?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Emily hesitated, but then she spoke again, her voice trembling. "The people we were running from. They're dangerous, and they won't stop until they get what they want." The rancher's heart sank. He had always sensed that there was more to their story, but now he understood the true extent of their fear. The rancher knew he had to protect them, no matter the cost. He would do whatever it took to keep them safe, even if it meant facing the dangers they had been running from. What he didn't realize was that the danger was much closer than he thought, and the shocking truth behind their past would soon come to light in ways that would change everything. Days passed, and the tension that had been building finally came to a head. The rancher, who had once felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, now found himself struggling to protect the women who had become a part of his life. Sarah and Emily were doing their best to fit into the quiet rhythm of ranch life, but it was clear that they were still haunted by their past. Emily, in particular, had become increasingly withdrawn, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon as if she expected danger to appear at any moment. The rancher had heard the fear in her voice when she had confessed to him about the people they were running from, but he hadn't realized how serious the threat was until that day. It was early morning when the first signs of trouble appeared. The rancher had been out checking on the cattle when he saw a group of riders approaching from a distance. At first, he thought they were just a few travelers passing by, but as they came closer, he saw the unmistakable signs of trouble. Their grim faces, the way they moved with purpose, and the weapons they carried. His heart sank. He knew immediately that these were the men Emily had feared. The rancher rushed back to the house, his mind racing. As he approached, he saw Sarah and Emily standing on the porch, their faces pale. Emily was clutching the children tightly to her chest, her eyes wide with fear. "It's them," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The rancher didn't need any more confirmation. He could see the riders now, and it was clear they weren't stopping for a friendly visit. He ran up to the porch, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Get inside now," he ordered. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then grabbed Emily's hand, pulling her inside. The rancher watched as they disappeared into the house, then turned to face the approaching riders. His mind was racing. He knew he had to protect them, but he wasn't sure how. The riders were now within shouting distance, and the rancher's heart pounded in his chest. He stepped forward, raising his hand in a gesture of peace. "What do you want?" he called out, his voice steady but firm. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, pulled his horse to a halt. He looked the rancher up and down before speaking in a gravelly voice. "We're looking for 2 women and their children," he said. "You've seen them, haven't you?" The rancher didn't answer right away. He knew he had to protect the women and children, but he also knew that lying could get him killed. He glanced back toward the house, then back at the riders. "I haven't seen anyone," he said slowly. "You've got the wrong ranch." The leader narrowed his eyes, clearly not convinced. "Don't lie to me," he said, his voice cold. "We know they came here. We'll search your place if we have to." The rancher's heart was pounding now. He had to act fast. He had no weapons, no way to fight back. He was a rancher, not a soldier. But he wasn't going to let these men hurt the people he had come to care for. He glanced at the barn in the distance and saw the shadows of the women and children hiding inside. They were safe, for now. But how long would they stay that way? The leader of the riders spurred his horse forward, his men following close behind. "We'll search your property, whether you like it or not," he said, his voice dripping with menace. The rancher's mind raced as he thought of what to do next. He knew he had to buy time, keep them occupied long enough for the women and children to escape. He wasn't sure how he was going to do it, but he knew he had to try. "Wait," the rancher called out, stepping forward. "I told you they're not here, but I'll take you to the town. You can check with the sheriff if you want. He'll tell you I haven't seen anyone." The leader of the riders eyed him suspiciously. "You're trying to get rid of us," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I don't trust you." The rancher's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I'm just trying to help," he said, his voice steady. "I don't want any trouble. Just let me take you to town. You'll see, I'm telling the truth." The leader considered his words for a moment, then nodded. "Fine," he said, his voice gruff. "We'll go to town. But don't try anything funny." The rancher nodded and turned, leading them toward the road. His mind was racing. He had bought them some time, but it wasn't enough. The women and children were still in danger, and he knew that if he didn't act fast, they would all be in serious trouble. He had to find a way to protect them, no matter what. As they walked, the rancher couldn't help but wonder, how far would he go to keep them safe? And what price would he have to pay to protect the people he had come to love? The rancher led the riders toward the town, his heart racing with every step. He knew this was only a temporary solution, buying a little time for Sarah and Emily to escape. He had to keep the riders distracted long enough for the women and children to get to safety, but every minute he spent walking beside them felt like a lifetime. The sound of hooves behind him echoed through the quiet landscape, and the rancher tried his best to ignore the growing sense of dread in his chest. Every step brought them closer to the town, but he knew he couldn't lead them there without putting everything at risk. If they found out the women and children had been hiding on his ranch, the consequences would be dire. He had to think of something, anything to keep them away from the house. The leader of the riders, a tall man with a scar running down his face, kept glancing at him suspiciously as they walked. The rancher could feel the tension in the air, the silent threat hanging over them like a dark cloud. "You sure about this?" the rider asked, his voice low and threatening. "You're taking us to the sheriff, right?" The rancher nodded, keeping his voice steady. "Yes, I'm sure," he said. "The sheriff will vouch for me. He knows I've had no dealings with anyone who's causing trouble." The rider didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press further. They walked in silence for a few more minutes, the only sound being the crunch of gravel beneath their boots and the faint rustle of the wind in the trees. The rancher's mind was racing. He had to figure out a way to get rid of them before they reached town. He had to protect Sarah, Emily, and the children. But how? Then it came to him. A plan, risky but his only chance. He had to stall them long enough to give the women a head start. "I'm going to take a detour," the rancher said abruptly, stopping in his tracks. The riders halted behind him, confused. "What do you mean?" the leader asked, narrowing his eyes. "I know a shortcut that'll get us to town faster," the rancher explained, trying to keep his voice calm. "We'll avoid the main road. It'll save us time, and we won't run into any more trouble." The leader considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Fine," he said. "Lead the way." The rancher turned, heading off the main road and toward a narrow path that wound through the hills. The riders followed, and the rancher felt his pulse quicken with every step. He was taking a huge risk, but it was his only option. As they made their way up the path, the rancher could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him. He had to make sure they stayed on this path long enough for Sarah and Emily to escape. The riders behind him didn't seem suspicious, but he could feel their eyes on him, watching every move he made. He knew they were close to figuring out something was wrong. The path twisted and turned, leading them further into the hills. The rancher's mind raced as he thought of the best way to buy more time. He couldn't lead them too far off course, or they would catch on. But if he could get them just a little farther away from the house, it might be enough. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the rancher spotted what he had been waiting for, a small creek that cut through the land. It was shallow, but it would be difficult for the riders to cross quickly. Perfect. We'll stop here for a moment, the rancher said, pulling his horse to a halt beside the creek. We can rest and make sure the horses are good to go. The riders followed suit, dismounting and leading their horses to the water. The rancher breathed a sigh of relief. He had bought them some time. Now he just had to make sure the riders didn't start asking questions. As they stood by the creek, the rancher kept his eyes on the horizon, waiting for any sign of movement. He knew the women and children were still a few miles ahead, but he hoped that by now they would be far enough away to avoid detection. After a few minutes, the leader of the riders called out. "All right, let's get moving," he said, his voice impatient. The rancher's heart skipped a beat. He had to act fast. "Just a little longer," he said, forcing a calm tone. "The horses need a break. We can't rush them." The leader looked at him skeptically but didn't protest. The rancher felt a rush of gratitude. Every minute was precious. The minutes ticked by slowly as the rancher kept his eyes on the riders, watching their every move. He knew they would start getting suspicious soon if he didn't move quickly. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the leader signaled to his men. "Let's go," he said. "We'll take the main road now. No more detours." The rancher's stomach sank. He had run out of time. He had to act, and fast. Without thinking, he turned and spurred his horse forward, galloping down the path toward the ranch. The riders shouted after him, but the rancher didn't slow down. He had to warn Sarah and Emily. He had to protect them, no matter the cost. As he raced back to the ranch, he felt the weight of the moment on his shoulders. This was it, the final confrontation, and he was ready to do whatever it took to protect his new family. The rancher rode as fast as he could, the pounding of his horse's hooves echoing through the empty landscape. He could feel the wind against his face, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He had made his decision. He was going to protect the women and children, no matter what it cost him. The riders were still shouting behind him, but the rancher had no intention of stopping. He had to get back to the ranch, to warn Sarah and Emily. As he rode, his mind raced. He had to think of a plan, a way to keep the riders from finding the women. He couldn't let them come to any harm. He knew that if they found out where they were hiding, it would be over. The rancher pushed his horse harder, the animal's muscles straining as they galloped down the dirt path. The wind whipped through his hair, but he didn't slow down. Every second counted. When he finally reached the ranch, he could see the barn in the distance. His heart sank. He didn't know how much time he had left before the riders reached the house. He had to warn them. The rancher kicked his horse into a final sprint, racing towards the barn. As he reached the barn door, he jumped off the horse and ran inside, calling for Sarah and Emily. "It's time to go," he said, his voice urgent. Sarah and Emily looked up in surprise, their faces filled with fear. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "They're coming," the rancher replied, his breath coming in short bursts. "The riders. We don't have much time. We have to get out of here now." Emily's eyes widened in fear, but she didn't hesitate. She grabbed her children and began to gather their things. Sarah followed suit, moving quickly but carefully. The rancher could hear the sound of hooves in the distance. The riders were getting closer. He looked at Sarah and Emily. "Get to the back of the barn," he said. "I'll hold them off for as long as I can. You have to run." Sarah nodded, her face determined. "We'll be fine," she said. "You just make sure they don't follow us." The rancher nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision he had just made. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let these women and children face the danger alone. As the two women and children disappeared into the back of the barn, the rancher stepped outside, his hand gripping the rifle that had been resting against the wall. He knew it was going to come to a fight. He didn't have the strength to stop the riders by himself, but he had to try. He couldn't let them take what they had fought so hard to protect. The riders appeared over the hill, their horses kicking up dust as they approached the ranch. The rancher's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The moment he had been dreading had finally arrived. He took a deep breath, steadying his hand on the rifle. As the riders drew closer, he stepped into the open, his stance defiant. The leader of the group, the man with the scar on his face, pulled his horse to a stop. He looked at the rancher, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "You're not getting away," the leader said, his voice cold. "Where are the women and children?" The rancher didn't flinch. He stood tall, his eyes locked on the leader. "They're not here," he said firmly. "You can leave, now. This is your last warning." The leader chuckled darkly, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. "You're a brave man, but you're not going to stop us. We've come too far to turn back." The rancher took a step forward, raising his rifle. "I said, they're not here," he repeated, his voice steady. "And if you think you can intimidate me, you're wrong. I'll protect these women and children with my life." For a moment, there was silence between them, the tension thick in the air. The rancher could feel the weight of the rifle in his hands, the threat of violence hanging over them. The leader's expression darkened. "You're making a big mistake," he said, his voice low and threatening. But before he could say anything else, the rancher fired a shot into the air. The sound echoed through the valley, and the riders flinched. "Leave," the rancher commanded, his voice unwavering. "Now, or I'll shoot." The leader hesitated, his eyes scanning the rancher's face. He could see that this wasn't a bluff. The rancher was serious. Slowly, the leader turned his horse and motioned for the others to follow. "You got lucky today, rancher," the leader called over his shoulder. "But we'll be back." The rancher watched as the riders rode away, their figures disappearing into the distance. His heart was still racing, but he let out a long breath, relieved that the immediate danger was over. He turned and ran back to the barn, where Sarah and Emily were waiting. The women were looking at him with wide eyes, both of them holding their breath. "It's over," the rancher said, his voice hoarse. "They're gone. For now." Sarah walked up to him, her face filled with gratitude. "You did it," she said softly. "You kept us safe." The rancher nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The danger wasn't over. But for now, they were safe. And that was enough. Days went by, and the rancher began to feel a strange sense of peace that he hadn't experienced in years. The threat of the riders was still fresh in his mind, but for now, his family was safe. Sarah, Emily, and the children had settled into the ranch with a sense of calm that surprised him. He could see the weight lifting from their shoulders, their smiles slowly returning. They were grateful, and so was he. But deep down, the rancher knew this moment of peace was fragile. He couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't over yet. The feeling only grew stronger as the days passed. The rancher continued with his routine, tending to the cattle and maintaining the ranch, but his thoughts were often clouded by worry. What if the riders returned? What if they didn't give up so easily? He couldn't afford to let his guard down. One evening, as the sun was beginning to set, the rancher was in the barn, fixing a fence that had been damaged during the storm. He worked in silence, the sound of his hammer echoing through the quiet evening air. It was then that he heard it, a soft rustle, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. He turned, his heart racing, but to his relief, it was just Sarah. She was holding a small basket, her face tired but content. "I brought you some dinner," she said, her voice gentle. The rancher smiled and took the basket from her, his eyes softening. "Thank you," he said, grateful for the simple kindness. As they sat down to eat, Sarah looked at him with a thoughtful expression. "You've been distant lately," she said, her tone quiet but steady. "Is everything all right?" The rancher hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I'm just worried," he admitted, his voice rough. "Worried that the trouble isn't over, that they'll come back." Sarah reached out and placed a hand on his. "You've done everything you can," she said softly. "We're safe, for now. You can't keep worrying about something that might never happen." The rancher looked at her, but deep down, he knew that the peace they had found was fragile. The riders wouldn't forget so easily, and neither would he. That night, after dinner, as the rancher lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he heard the sound of hooves once again. This time, it was closer. The rancher's heart skipped a beat. He shot out of bed, his mind racing. He had to act fast. He grabbed his rifle and rushed out of the house, moving quietly through the yard. He crept toward the barn, hoping to catch a glimpse of the riders before they saw him. His breath was shallow as he crept through the dark. The sound of hooves grew louder, and the rancher's stomach tightened. He crouched low, his hand gripping the rifle tightly. Suddenly, he heard a voice. It was the leader of the riders, the man with the scar. "We know you're here," the leader called out, his voice loud enough to carry in the night air. The rancher's heart pounded in his chest. He had been discovered. He glanced around, searching for a way out. He couldn't face them alone. He needed help. But as he looked around, he realized that the women and children were inside, and they would be in danger if they came outside. He had to keep them safe. The rancher took a deep breath and stepped forward, his rifle raised. "You're not welcome here," he shouted, his voice steady despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm him. "I told you to leave." The riders stopped in their tracks, and the leader turned to face him. The rancher could see the anger in the man's eyes, but he stood his ground. "We're not leaving," the leader said coldly. "You'll pay for hiding them. All of you will." The rancher felt a chill run down his spine. He knew what was coming. He had no choice but to fight. He raised his rifle and aimed it at the leader, his finger hovering over the trigger. "I won't let you hurt them," he said, his voice low but firm. "Not as long as I'm alive." The leader laughed, a cruel, cold laugh that sent a shiver through the rancher's bones. "You think you can stop us?" he sneered. "You're just one man. You're outnumbered." The rancher's grip tightened on the rifle, but he didn't waver. He knew this was the moment he had been preparing for. He wasn't going to let them take what was his. "I'll stop you," he said, his voice unwavering. "I'll do whatever it takes." The tension in the air was palpable as the two men locked eyes. The rancher knew the stakes were high, and he was ready to fight for his new family. But little did he know, the true battle was just beginning, and the choice he made in that moment would change everything for him and those he had vowed to protect. The rancher stood there, rifle in hand, his eyes locked on the leader of the riders. The tension in the air was thick, like a storm ready to break. His heart raced, but he didn't let his fear show. The sound of hooves echoed in the distance, but for now, it was just the two of them, facing each other, waiting for the next move. The leader of the riders, a man with a scar running down his cheek, took a step forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. His eyes were cold, calculating, and the rancher could see the malicious intent in them. The leader smirked, his voice low and threatening. "You really think you can protect them, don't you?" he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "You're just one man, and you're outnumbered." The rancher's grip tightened on the rifle, but he didn't flinch. "I don't need to outnumber you," he said firmly. "I just need to stop you." The leader laughed, a harsh, guttural sound. "You're wasting your time," he sneered. "We'll take what we want, no matter what." The rancher knew that the words were true. If the riders weren't stopped now, they would come back, and they would take everything. He couldn't let that happen. He had to protect Sarah, Emily, and the children. He had promised them safety, and he wasn't about to break that promise. Without warning, the rancher aimed the rifle and fired a shot into the air. The sound echoed through the valley, and the riders flinched, momentarily distracted. The rancher used the momentary confusion to move quickly, circling to the side of the leader. The leader's eyes widened as he realized what was happening, but it was too late. The rancher raised the rifle, aiming directly at him. "Get off my land," the rancher growled, his voice cold and unwavering. The leader raised his hands in mock surrender. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You're still outnumbered. There are more of us, and we'll come back for you. For them." The rancher's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't let the leader's threats shake him. He had to act. He couldn't let them hurt his family. "Then I'll be ready," he said, his voice firm and steady. "But you're not going to take them today." The leader sneered but didn't make a move. Instead, he signaled for the other riders to back off. "We'll be back," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "And next time, you won't be so lucky." The rancher didn't respond. He simply watched as the riders turned their horses around and began to ride away. He didn't lower the rifle until they were out of sight. Only then did his shoulders sag with relief. He had done it. For now, his family was safe. As he turned to go back to the house, his thoughts were a whirlwind. The leader's words echoed in his mind. "We'll be back." The rancher knew it was only a matter of time before the riders returned. And when they did, he would have to be ready. He couldn't afford to wait. He needed a plan. He needed to protect Sarah, Emily, and the children, and he knew the only way to do that was to take action now. When he arrived at the house, Sarah and Emily were waiting for him, their faces filled with concern. "Is it over?" Emily asked, her voice shaky. The rancher nodded, though he knew it wasn't over. "Not by a long shot." "For now," he said, his voice low. "But they'll be back." Sarah stepped forward, her expression resolute. "Then we'll be ready," she said, her voice steady. The rancher looked at her, surprised by her strength. He had always thought of himself as the protector, but in that moment, he realized that they were all in this together. He wasn't alone anymore. Together, they could face whatever was coming. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe," the rancher said quietly. "I won't let them take you." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We're in this together," she said softly. "And we'll make it through." The rancher felt a surge of hope rise in his chest. For the first time in a long while, he believed that maybe, just maybe, they could win this fight. But the danger wasn't over. He could feel it in his bones. The riders would come back, and next time, they wouldn't be so easily stopped. The rancher knew he had to be ready, but for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace. The house was quiet, the children safe, and Sarah and Emily standing beside him. Together, they would face whatever came next, and they would survive. The rancher stood in the quiet of the barn, his mind racing as the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the land. He had bought them time, but he knew it wouldn't be long before the riders returned. He could feel it in his bones, a weight he couldn't shake. He turned to Sarah and Emily, who were quietly preparing for the night, their movements careful and deliberate. They hadn't spoken much since the encounter with the riders, but the tension in the air was thick enough to be felt by anyone who entered. Sarah looked up at him, her face etched with concern. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" she asked softly. The rancher didn't answer right away, but he didn't need to. She already knew. "We'll be ready," Emily said from across the room, her voice steady, though there was a hint of unease in her eyes. The rancher nodded, but in the pit of his stomach, a sense of dread lingered. He had made a promise to protect them, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep it. He couldn't fight an entire group of riders on his own, no matter how determined he was. He needed a plan, and fast. The rancher paced the barn, thinking back to the few moments he had spent with the leader of the riders. There was something off about the man, something that gnawed at him. The leader had made it clear they weren't finished. They would come back. The rancher knew he couldn't wait for them to return. He had to take the initiative. He had to protect his family, even if it meant making the first move. He walked over to where Sarah and Emily were sitting, their faces weary. "I have an idea," he said, his voice low and serious. "We need to set a trap. We can't wait for them to come back. We need to take control." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes wide. "A trap?" she asked, clearly unsure of what he meant. "What kind of trap?" The rancher exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "We'll use the land to our advantage. We know the area better than they do. We can set up false trails, mislead them into thinking we've gone one way while we prepare for them to come another." Emily's eyes narrowed as she considered his plan. "You want to lure them here, where we'll have the advantage?" she asked. The rancher nodded. "Exactly. We'll make them think we're weak, that we've fled. But when they come looking for us, we'll be ready." It was a dangerous plan, but it was their best chance. The rancher could see the uncertainty in their eyes, but he also saw something else: trust. They were willing to follow him, to fight alongside him. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't alone. "We'll need to move quickly," the rancher continued, his voice firm. "We have to act tonight if we want to be ready by morning." Sarah stood, a determined look on her face. "Let's do it," she said. Emily nodded, standing as well. "We'll make it work. We're in this together." As the rancher turned to begin organizing the plan, he couldn't shake the feeling that the riders were already closer than they thought. But he pushed the thought aside. There was no time for doubt. They had to act, and they had to act fast. The night passed in a blur of activity. They worked together, using the knowledge of the land to set up their trap. False trails were made, the terrain manipulated to mislead any trackers. The rancher's heart pounded in his chest, but there was no turning back. He couldn't afford to hesitate. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, the rancher took his position, watching the road ahead. Sarah and Emily had already hidden, waiting for the riders to take the bait. It felt like an eternity before they saw movement in the distance. The rancher's pulse quickened. The riders were coming. He could see them now, making their way down the path they had set up. The plan was working. The riders took the bait, following the false trail straight into the trap. The rancher's heart pounded in his chest as he signaled to Sarah and Emily. It was time. They moved quickly, silently, like shadows in the early morning light. The rancher felt his breath catch in his throat as the riders got closer. This was it. The final confrontation. He had no idea how this would end, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let them take his family. He wasn't going to let them destroy everything he had fought so hard to build. The riders were now within range, and the rancher tightened his grip on the rifle. This was the moment he had been waiting for. This was the moment that would decide everything. The rancher's finger tightened on the trigger as the riders came into view, their horses pounding the earth beneath them. He could hear their shouts, the sound of metal clinking, and the hooves growing louder, but there was no turning back now. This was it. The moment of truth. The plan had worked. The riders had followed the false trail straight into their trap, and now, with the sun rising behind him, the rancher stood ready to defend everything he had fought for. Sarah and Emily were hidden, waiting for the right moment to strike. The rancher had made sure they were positioned in a place where they could move quickly if needed, but he wasn't sure how long he could hold off the riders on his own. There were only a few of them left, but the leader, his scarred face set in a grimace of determination, was still at the front. The rancher felt his heart race, but his hands were steady. He had to keep his focus. He couldn't let fear cloud his judgment. He had made a promise to protect them, and he would do whatever it took to keep that promise. The riders were almost upon him now, their horses kicking up dust as they rode through the narrow gap in the terrain he had carefully selected. As they neared, the rancher stood tall, rifle raised, eyes fixed on the leader. "You're not getting them," the rancher shouted, his voice filled with defiance. The leader's eyes narrowed, but he didn't hesitate. He spurred his horse forward, his hand reaching for the weapon at his side. The rancher fired first, the shot ringing out and sending a cloud of dust into the air. One of the riders pulled up suddenly, clutching his shoulder where the bullet had struck. He fell off his horse and hit the ground hard, but the leader kept charging, undeterred. "You're outnumbered," the leader sneered. "This will end the way we want it to." The rancher took a deep breath and steadied his aim. "Not today," he said. Another shot rang out, and another rider fell. The leader's expression twisted in fury, but he didn't stop. The rancher's pulse quickened, the adrenaline surging as he fired again, taking out a third rider. There were only two left, and the leader was still charging. The rancher's rifle was almost out of ammunition, but he wasn't going to back down. He had to make his stand. With a final shot, the rancher hit the leader's horse, causing it to rear up in pain. The rider tried to regain control, but the horse bucked wildly, throwing him to the ground. The rancher rushed forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He was almost there. The leader scrambled to his feet, but the rancher was faster. He grabbed the man by the collar and lifted him off the ground, his face inches from the leader's. "This is over," the rancher growled. "You've lost." The leader struggled, but the rancher's grip was firm. "You won't win," the leader spat, his eyes full of hatred. "We'll come back. We'll never forget this." The rancher looked the man in the eye, his expression unwavering. "No," he said firmly. "You won't." He let go of the leader, pushing him away. The man staggered back, his hands outstretched for balance. He glared at the rancher, but there was no fire left in his eyes. The fight was over. The rancher turned, walking back to where Sarah and Emily were waiting. They had stayed hidden during the battle, but now they stepped forward, their faces filled with relief. "You did it," Sarah said, her voice soft but full of gratitude. The rancher nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. There would always be more challenges, more threats to face. But for now, he had won. For now, his family was safe. The sun had risen higher, casting a golden light over the ranch. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, and the land, once again, felt like home. The rancher's heart swelled with pride. He had fought for this life, and he had won. And as he stood there with Sarah, Emily, and the children, he realized that this was what it meant to truly be free. He had found his place, his purpose, and his family. And no one, no matter how many riders came, would ever take that away from him. The rancher looked out over the land, the rolling hills stretching into the distance. He had been alone for so long, but now he had everything he needed. He had his family, and he would fight for them, no matter what it took. And with that, he knew his story wasn't over. It was just beginning.